Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of the Disloyal Idiots podcast, where my team in hockey news is looking to wrap people in bubble wrap. Andy's team on the football side is looking to not punch players, and Steve's team is looking to finally not lose to Syracuse and Central New York adjacent players.
just really coming off with the top rope here, which is fine. It's absolutely fine. But yeah, it's now that we're in the overlap season, it is absolutely wild to try to keep up with everything. Like I can definitely say, Syracuse football being bad has made it easy to keep up with basketball in a way that I was not doing last year at this time.
The past 2 years, because again, the past 2 years, Syracuse has also been in bowl contention at least as well. We also had to deal with a coaching change. So you could say for the past 3 years, Syracuse basketball hasn't been paid attention to in this much detail in the month of November and December. And
Yeah,
and luckily, Syracuse basketball actually is worthy to pay attention to. Yes, the opponents aren't up to the level, but Syracuse wasn't playing at a good level to beat these lesser opponents by this level.
yeah, and I think one of the things that is really important for us to kind of realize is that in some of the coverage that has been done on News Magician, on some of the coverage that has been done on Syracuse.com, it has been made expressly clear by multiple people that this is by design. There's a new general manager, Alex Klein, who has now been in control of the program for a full year plus now. Last year, obviously, a little bit more get your feet wet under you year, figure things out. This year, full off season, full everything in charge. And what you're seeing and what you're realizing is that this is the path forward for the correct way to do scheduling. This is the game. Play a bunch of teams below the 200 mark on KenPom. Play them at home. If you're going to play a team on the road, play teams in an environment that makes it easier for you. And the team is building confidence. And I think that, look, I went to this last game that was in Philly that took place yesterday. It was really awesome to see the team in person and see just in general. And I think we can talk about this a little bit more. The level of effort is just increased. Some of that is, I think, the players who returned have definitely taken a big step forward, like Donnie Freeman, just physically and energy-wise, very different player than the Donnie Freeman we saw last year. And I also think that this team, just like the transfers, there's so many of them, but they all really like to play defense, which was not something that we can say over the last couple of years under Red Autry. The defensive side of the ball was borderline unwatchable. And this year's team is just, even against lesser opponents, so much better at making adjustments, so much better at being physical every second, and just keeping their heads switched on the defensive side of the ball.
I don't remember if it was last year or the year before, but there was a comment floating out there somewhere where I think it might have been read, and I could be completely misattributing this, but there was a comment floating out there where, at least in one of the off seasons, that Syracuse didn't get the players that it wanted to in the transfer portal, which, unless you're Duke or North Carolina or a true blue blood, you're not going to be reloading through the freshman recruiting class as much as the true blue blood programs are. Now, Syracuse did do that a little bit this year with Sadiq White and Kyan Anthony, but the transfers nowadays is how you're going to have to win in college basketball. And we've already seen that, especially the Nathan George pickup, I think has been the biggest pickup so far, because you solved the point guard and defense at guard problem that you had pretty much the past 5 years or so with Nathan George. Because defensively, he's been excellent, and he's been a great passer of the ball as well. And funnily enough, like you said, it all turns back over to scheduling. Casilla wasn't wrong, he was just early. And that applies for both sports.
Yeah, the scheduling, and obviously this is the last week we get to enjoy this glow up period, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But the schedule is going to get harder. I will say it definitely looks as if most of the ACC is an enigma or bad. So there's a
Hi,
good
Boston College.
there's a good chance here that again, if this team continues to play competently, we'll be in a better shape than last year. And again, like, this is not a high bar we're talking about clearing from last year, but it is positive to see so many things kind of change on the dime. One of the things that I do think is, we're kind of burying the lead here and talking about all these things that have not been referenced in the title, but like, look, you had Carmelo Anthony sitting courtside, you had the entire Anthony family sitting courtside, and Cayenne, for yet another game, not only was really strong offensively and a focal part of the Orange offense, but he looked way better on defense than I ever could imagine that he would look. I will, I listened to the Mike Waters podcast that he does. And he was, taking some blows from Donna about Mike was very much kind of in my camp, which was, this kid is not going to be that good in year one. Like, let's slow down and some of that was just due to a natural reaction to the hype that we saw coming into the season. I think that I was wrong on that to feel that way, because this is a kid who can play at the NCAA level. It'll be different to see when we go up against better teams, but at least for right now, we know when Syracuse plays a team that is worse than Syracuse, Cayenne can be the focal point on defense and is not a liability on offense, which is not what I expected out of this kid in year one, let alone in the first 3 games of the season.
The thing that strikes me about Cayenne the most, and is that we've gotten used as Syracuse fans to a certain inefficiency, I would say, with shooters, especially when the range increases. I mean, you take a look at Syracuse 3-point shooting the ball right now. Like, that's one of the biggest concerns about Syracuse right now, is that 3-point shooting wise, they do not look great. However, Cayenne, just in general, his field goal percentage is really good. And for a guard to have great efficiency, generally shooting above 50% from the floor, is a really, really promising sign. Yes, again, lesser competition. So how does that go against higher competition? We'll definitely see. But it's very, very it's a very, very good sign. Yes, the defensive signs are great. For me, the biggest takeaway from looking at Cayenne was that he is shooting the ball at a very, very efficient clip, where you had high volume shooting from your guards in the past few years. It wasn't necessarily, though, at the most efficient level, which is also what caused a lot of worry among Syracuse, because it created a lot of inconsistent offense, which led to a lot of bad losses in the past couple of years.
Yeah, and I think that this is where things get really interesting for the team, where when you talk about those things, Christian, the first player that comes to my mind is JJ Starling. And like, look, we know what Starling can be. There was a lot of talk before the season on, why is Starling getting more recognition? Like, he was a second team preseason All ACC, but when you looked to analytics, when you looked to really smart guys in college basketball kind of talk about it, JJ was never getting mentioned. And the answer was that his efficiency was pretty terrible with a high usage rate. And that is not necessarily out of line with what he has done previously. Add in the defensive liabilities that you have with him, and then all of a sudden you have a player that, obviously, focal point of Syracuse last season, this year has been hurt for the majority of the minutes played by the team so far, and the team is fundamentally better. I don't think this team is better without JJ Starling. I do think, though, that we are seeing why the plan last year was never for JJ to be the focal point of the offense and never for JJ to be the focal point of the entire team. I think that there is a world here. You will need that spark and you will need that offensive firepower that he does bring in certain occasions. I am starting to think that he might be accustomed to a bench role better than he was as the locked-on starter for this team. And how Red navigates that is going to be really interesting. And again, I want to be really clear here. He is hurt with a lower body injury. Did not warm up this past weekend, even after a full week off. So whatever is ailing him is definitely serious enough that I would doubt that we see him against Monmouth on Tuesday. And then the question becomes, how ready is he to go up against some of the best teams in the country next week in Las Vegas. Like I think that this is a continually developing situation in terms of his availability. But for now, to your point, Christian, the weaknesses that we've seen on the offensive side of the ball are all things that we know about without JJ in the lineup. Those weaknesses are not completely gone, but the players that we're replacing those minutes with are have a very different skill set than JJ has.
And the big thing is that JJ is going to play the 2. Nathan George is
Yeah.
locked in as the number 1. We saw why last year. He led the ACC in assists, and his defensive capabilities have risen up. So George is playing the 1. He's locked down that role, which means that JJ is going to have to play the 2 if he comes back into the lineup. And right now, the defensive skills that Cayenne has shown tells me that if that continues, maybe it is a more of a conversation that JJ doesn't start immediately when he comes back into the lineup. Now, if he were to come back against Monmouth, I still think put JJ into the starting lineup. But if the sample size continues to grow, that shows, hey, Anthony is not a defensive liability like he has shown the first 3 games, then you start to say, hey, for the overall balance of the team, maybe it is Anthony who starts. And ultimately, maybe it's Anthony. Maybe if he doesn't start, maybe it's Anthony who gets the brunt of the minutes. As we know with Syracuse, just because you're the starter doesn't mean you're the player who's on the court most of the time. See Boeheim with any center ever.
Yeah, definitely a true point, and maybe Autry has a little bit of that Boeheim in him, and we'll see that how that looks moving forward. I do think that one of the interesting things that you did hit on, Christian, earlier that I kind of want to circle back to with the shooting is the lack of 3-point weaponry. And we saw that this past weekend against Drexel, like in that first half. Syracuse was never like the defense was not as strong. The rebounding was not as strong in the first half as opposed to the second half. But Syracuse was never able to really pull ahead because not have consistent 3-point shooting from anyone or from any combination of players that really allowed them to pull away from what was not a great defensive effort by Drexel either. They were really locked into drive, kick, brick, or drive, kick, and then drive again. And look, you can do that against the teams that Syracuse has been playing, but someone needs to step up and start shooting threes. And obviously, Kings is the one that everybody kind of looks and says, we brought you in as a 3-point specialist. And in this past game, I don't believe he had a point until the second half, even though he had plenty of rebounds and plenty of assists. So to me, it is kind of like this weird question mark with this team where I think there are some 3-point shooters on this team. It seems as if, like, when you watch the offensive sets, there are guys open for 3-point looks, but they're just not getting the ball. And when they do get those shots, they're just not falling at a rate that makes you go, oh yeah, that'll work itself out with more volume.
The volume thing is definitely an interesting part because, Cayenne goes 2 of 3 from 3, but do you expect him to be your main 3-point guy? I don't think so. I mean, he's been excellent when he's been driving in the paint, and even showing off a vintage mellow jumper on the baseline. So, like, I don't think you want Cayenne to be your main 3. Obviously, you don't want Georgia to be your main 3. So all eyes do look to Kings and say, hey, you've got to be the guy who's going to be the main 3. We don't necessarily want Donnie to be the main 3 guy, even though he showed he can be the 3 guy. You need his presence in the paint to also be a secondary option to take away from Kyle, because both of them are going to benefit with their presence in the paint offensively. So it turns to Kings to be that guy, or else you try and find someone off the bench. And is that Luke Fennell who knocked down a 3? Maybe not. You're not expecting Sadiq to be that guy either as well. So it creates an interesting balance of how you want to distribute that. Because while the natural opinion would be to say, hey, have George and Anthony shoot more threes, it takes away from their strengths, which could be to the detriment of the offense.
Right, exactly. And I think it's one of those situations where we haven't quite figured out what that balance is going to look like. Like, you're 100% right. I'd rather have Donnie in the paint And I think the other part of it is that, like, when you have Kyle in that lineup, like, he is such a physical presence and he is a great player to have defensively. Offensively, there's really only one thing he can do, and it's operate within the immediate vicinity of the rim, which is fine. You need to have those guys, but like it does limit the offensive capabilities of the lineup when he's on the floor. And he's not going to be a stretch 3-4 in any stretch in any case of the imagination. So yeah, now you're really starting to look at, you know, I liked what we saw out of the Fennel, like coming off the bench. He was just chucking it up there, even though it wasn't necessarily the best thing. Tyler Betsy got hurt in this game, and the sophomore from Cincinnati is somebody who I don't really think has that three ball in him, even though he was like kind of getting some looks, but wasn't really that kind of option either. So it really does turn to like which one of these guards is going to hit the three. And maybe again, like that wasn't necessarily JJ's forte when he was healthy last year. He's really not somebody that look like as a 3-point shooter. So you've got your three guards that you expect to have the most run. None of them are 3-point shooters. So how is this going to get managed? How is this going to get balanced? Is probably the biggest question that I have for this team for the rest of the season. And I do think that it's again, they've only played, three games at this point. Like, we still have a lot of time to figure this out, and how that gets figured out, I think, is going to be honestly a big determining factor of whether or not Red is in this job at the end of the season or not, because it's going to be directly correlated to does this team make the tournament or not.
And to circle it all back to the point you made at the beginning of this conversation, it all comes down to scheduling. Because, yes, there were some tougher teams in terms of the non conference early on that Syracuse had traditionally scheduled some of those great New York teams that, Syracuse couldn't necessarily handle. See Colgate for the past couple of years and Cornell to an extent as well. That Syracuse couldn't necessarily find the juju of what works and what doesn't because they were in a battle with them and they just had to try and brute force their way to a win to not get a embarrassing loss on their resume. Now that Syracuse, is playing these lesser teams, like let's be honest, it's Binghamton and I forget the other team. They play Delaware State and
Mhm.
Drexel. Like they're not going to be the type of teams that are going to necessarily challenge Syracuse. So it gives Syracuse the opportunity against real competition to be like, okay, let's this is a new team. We need to settle in and figure it out. Kind of like how at the beginning of football season, we're all like, it's a new team. It's not a great idea to try and figure it out against Tennessee.
Yeah, exactly. And we're talking about like the schedule. Like this upcoming week, Syracuse has a game against Monmouth. I'm scrolling Ken Palm and I'm already in the
Yeah.
160, and like we're not seeing there. And another game that Syracuse is probably going to be totally fine. Blowing out. The question, and it's the games after that. Like that's when things are going to get difficult here, because that's when Syracuse has guaranteed games against number one. You got Houston, who's a top 5 Ken Palm team. You've got Kansas, who's a top 25 Ken Palm team. Those games are going to be tough. Now, to be fair, schedule. Syracuse has played their way to 48 on the Ken Palm rankings, thanks to this very early slate of very winnable games and padding the stats. So I do think that there is an element here to say, look, this team is doing better. How hard do we crash back down to earth next week? Don't know. We'll probably talk about those matchups a little bit more in next week's show. But for now, when I look at this team and I look at what they've done so far, you can't help but be optimistic, if only because they're so much better than last year's team. And the schedule is allowing them to work in different combinations that we know they needed to try out last year, but we never really got the opportunity to.
Okay, Andy, you enjoy late night coffee? Because
I
remember, this Monmouth game coming up on Tuesday is 9 p.m.
absolutely love a East Coast college basketball game that starts at 9. Thank you so much, ACC Network. So glad that this
Hey,
is what happens.
hey, every Q's click counts.
I'm just saying, when you add teams from the West Coast, why not have the West Coast teams play on the West Coast times? But The world may never know, Christian. On the I think basketball wise, we covered a lot here. Football obviously didn't play this week, which
But we
means you
haven't
can't
had a pod
lose.
for the past 3 weeks.
Yes. It turns out, holistically, you don't have a quarterback. It's really tough to win games.
No, really? Whoever gave you that idea?
Yeah. I think I give Fran a lot of credit here. I thought he would be a lot more loyal to Ricky Collins than he ended up being.
And me
And
too. Me too. I would agree with that.
He tried to push every button he could. And it is funny to me to now see that look, none of the quarterbacks that Syracuse has are very good. I would not expect Ricky to be on the roster next season. I think he is a prime candidate to pull a Carson Del Rio Wilson and drop down a level and go to a group of 5 a team and be a starter there. But it does appear from the recruiting standpoint, saw that Syracuse is getting themselves in the mix for a bunch of 2026 kids now. Fran is looking at this quarterback room saying, not good enough, guys, not good enough.
Well, because what's also helping is James Franklin leaves Penn State and Fran says, "Hey, Northeast guys, hi, how are you doing? I'm Fran again."
It is going to be interesting to see how we're not a recruiting show. We're not recruiting experts, but if you've been paying any attention, I believe Syracuse has made official contact and had visits scheduled with at least 4 former Penn State commits, all high 3 stars, 4-star players who had previously been on Syracuse's radar before they committed to Penn State. I think that we've also gotten the mix with a couple of kids in the Georgia area who obviously were committed to LSU now that Brian Kelly is out at LSU. Obviously,
or at least claims to be.
Or at least claims to be, but that is to be seen another day. Florida as well is another one where we'd be looking at potentially more. So either way, the recruiting trail is busy for 2026, which is not I appreciate the hustle here from Fran because I do think that there is a tacit, unlike the college basketball side of things, there is an aggressive realization from Fran that this team is young and there are a lot of young guys playing. Fran is very much still trying to stockpile with as much talent as possible in case 1, injuries, and 2, hey, look, just because you're coming in with all this pedigree, just because we scouted you and we felt good about you, doesn't mean that's going to translate once we get into a game environment. And I think it's really obvious that also in the transfer portal this year, I think we're going to see the team be pretty aggressive about going after more skill position guys than they've been in the past.
Definitely quarterback wise. I mean, because you just need you saw what happened this year. You can't have a non-option if Steve goes down again because everyone expects Steve to be the quarterback next year, and it looks pretty good. So, so you definitely need a quarterback, and you see what Jonte Cook can do at times. Past couple of weeks, I haven't been that impressed with Cook, but like, and part of that is quarterbacks, but at the same time, there's been a couple of plays where he's like, you expect Yassine, and you maybe need another running back. But all that being said, Fran has always been a guy, and he said this last year when Fran brought in the first big recruiting class that he fully owned himself, that he wants to be a guy who builds his program through high school recruiting and not necessarily rely on the transfer portal, especially with the new rules this year. Remember, this year there's only one transfer window. It happens at the very beginning of January and only goes until January 10th or so for players to enter their name into the transfer portal officially, which means if there is a player that Fran wants and that he finds them in the spring, he can't get them. And so players like Angeli last year and, TJ Ferguson and Austin Collins, all those guys were spring transfer window gets. And Syracuse doesn't have the opportunity to get those guys. So it puts more emphasis on the team to get players through the freshman rankings and the recruits. and to build that depth. And because Fran has also kept on saying he's got a young team, and that's completely true. So many of the players that are playing right now are freshmen and sophomores. So it puts a lot of emphasis to get them playing time. And yes, the results maybe not be there offensively wise, and a large part of that is due to the quarterback. But when you look at these first half performances of the defense, they've been very, very good for Syracuse over the past 4 weeks. It's just unfortunately they get tired because they're on the field so much that it's natural for them to, you know, not be as sharp as they were in the first halves. And we've seen that pretty much every week that this team defensively gets tired out because they're just sitting for a couple of seconds. The offense goes 3 and out, and they've got to get it back out there. So
Yeah, and
yeah,
I think that one of the things that is just super important here to remember is that, like, at the beginning of the season, people were calling for Elijah Robinson's head, and we're talking about Fran firing Elijah. And I think that this defense has grown so much this year. And again, super young unit without a lot of depth on the defensive line side of the things. And that's tough to work with. And I would anticipate Fran to hit the portal hard again on the defensive line here, because you need to have at least 5 or 6 bodies that you feel comfortable with taking, 56% of your snaps. Like, that is, it's a brutal position to play in modern college football. And the secondary, again, it seems as if everybody is willing to commit, or at least say that they're staying through for next season, which is great. I think that the linebacker group has obviously been a large weakness, but has improved time over time because, again, we're playing a lot more kids there, and letting them kind of make the mistakes and learn. And I think that what you're seeing is this defense next year is going to be the best defense Fran Brown has ever had. It is going to certainly have some of the most talented players that he's ever had on that side of the ball. And it's certainly, if you fortify the line and the secondary through the transfer portal, it's going to be a top half ACC defense. The key, like what you're saying, Christian, is that no matter who is quarterback, whether it's Angeli or whether it's someone else, because Angeli's Achilles is not ready to go at the beginning of the season, or he re-injures it because Achilles injuries on turf just scare the crap out of me. We know that the offense is going to move at tempo. And I'm seriously wondering if now that we've had a couple of years of Fran, because we've had that recruiting, because we've got more Fran guys and Elijah guys in the depth chart, the defense will just improve because there's going to be more comfort in rotating guys and moving more snap and giving more guys more snaps, just because of that volume of the defensive side of the ball. And I think that that's going to be important. That's definitely interesting. And I think it's going to be an interesting continual development as the season goes on next year. But again, we've only got a couple games left here for Syracuse. And I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about this upcoming matchup, if only because I know that we are bad. I know that our defense gets tired. And I know that our offense is not good. But oh boy, like, outside of the quarterback position, I think we are better than Boston College at pretty much every position. The problem is that, Boston College has a functional quarterback and a functional offense, and we do not.
And don't forget, you might be making the same mistake Kevin made earlier in our Slack, which is that Boston College game is next week, not the upcoming game.
Oh my gosh. So then, oh wait, no, this is when we have to go to Notre Dame, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes.
No, this is Survive. This is the survival.
It was so funny to see Kevin make that realization in Slack earlier today, and to have you make the same realization right now.
There is one game left on the Syracuse football schedule, and it's the Boston College game. Like that's just the reality of the situation here. Play Notre Dame, survive, don't get too hurt. Like, know you're going to lose by 50, and then really hope that Marcus Freeman takes it easy on you, because he and Fran Brown seem to be good. Marcus Freeman and other coaches don't seem to be. He really does not seem to like Pat Narduzzi, which, to be fair, I don't think very many people do like Pat Narduzzi, but that game was that was the run up the score on them and show them what it's like. And hopefully against Syracuse, because it's senior day there, he rotates the team and we get to see a lot of the depth Notre Dame seniors come in the second half, and things are a little bit less painful.
Unfortunately, we didn't get to see the Angeli revenge game this year. and we might not next year also, which kind of is sad. But um, that takes a lot. It takes a lot of shine out of this game, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, like that. Honestly, like when I was looking at this game early in the season, and when everybody was doing their previews, like I don't think anybody had Syracuse winning this game outright. I
No.
think we all thought Notre Dame was going to be competing for the national title. With their losses, are still probably in the playoff. And that would have been interesting, especially after the Clemson win. If Angeli was healthy, man, like this is a guy going back to Notre Dame who I think could have had a really good argument to be starting at Notre Dame. So it is a situation where this season does feel like a bit of a throw it away, crumple it up, never look back at it kind of vibe. But like we talked about, there's been enough young players who have shown positives to say, you know what, it was worth it. And I think that going into next year, I'm still relatively optimistic about all things considered. It's just a matter of, man, you really need Angeli to be healthy or really rehaul that quarterback room, because I did not realize how bad. Let me rephrase this. I did not realize how remarkably inconsistent Ricky Collins was going to be consistently. And that there is literally no one else besides Ricky Collins and Steve Angeli that can play quarterback at the D1 level on this team right now.
Welcome to Syracuse, Arch Manning.
Look, man, I would not be opposed. I think that it's really interesting to see what's going on across court. We know, and this is going to be the interesting part here. It seems like you hit on this early. It seems as if Angeli is committed to coming back to Syracuse next year. I think that it is totally reasonable for other schools to poke around and be like, hey, you looked really good before you got hurt. You want to come and play at a school that's not Syracuse? I don't think he's got any interest in leaving. What I do think has changed here is that now that people saw how good he was, he obviously has 2 years left of eligibility, but he is going to be a super senior next year, and then he could be a super senior the year after. I would want to pull a Kyle McCord and have an elite stat padding 2026 and then go to the NFL rather than come back for an extra super senior year if all things go well in 2026. And at that point, it is interesting where I think we would all like to see Fran get in some sort of experience backup with multiple years of eligibility who is willing to sit behind Angeli for a year and then take over the reins in 2027. I just don't know if that mythical quarterback exists.
It's interesting because when Fran first came in, there were two quarterback names that were floating out there for Syracuse. One of them was McCord, and we all knew that McCord only had 1 year. Who knows if the waiver would have worked out, but we all assumed it was going to be for 1 year. The other name that was floating around, and I know it hasn't gone necessarily as well in year two, was Malik Murphy. And I was generally on the Murphy train just because of those years of control and development theoretically. And as we know, he only spends 1 year at Duke and then goes to Oregon State. So it's difficult to see because you can't survive in college football right now by quarterback shopping 1 year to the next. The only programs that seem to be able to do that happen to be Alabama and Georgia, because that's where the quarterbacks want to go, and Ohio State. So like those are the only three schools where they can afford to go quarterback shopping because they know they have the pull to do that. So that's why I always prefer the quarterback control years and allowing them to develop, and you hope that they can develop. One of the interesting things that we haven't gotten a chance to talk about as well, in that situation, is the staffing changes that Syracuse has made in the football staff. So Nunzio Campanelli and Michael Johnson Sr. have switched positions. So Campanelli is now the tight ends coach, and Michael Johnson Sr. is back to the quarterbacks coach. Miles White is out as pass game coordinator, and former Michigan OC Josh Gaddis is now the wide receivers and pass game coordinator as well. So it'll be interesting to see how that continues to work itself out, especially with the personnel and especially with the relationship side of it as well.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we're going to try to do just as we hit here. Like we were trying to get a guest on to kind of talk about post Clemson. Where did Fran Brown sit in the coaching conversations? I think we'll probably have that conversation with this guest in the offseason after the dust has settled on a lot of hirings, not just because, hey, where does Fran Brown rank now that we just had what will probably be the craziest coaching carousel offseason that we've ever had, but the assistants that Fran might shuffle in and out could be really interesting here. Like, look, I think we know Elijah Robinson wants to be a head coach somewhere. Fran made that abundantly clear when he brought Elijah in. I think it's really obvious that Jeff Nixon is incredibly talented, and I think Jeff Nixon should probably get a chance to be a head coach at the collegiate level somewhere. Or
he's interviewed for head coaching jobs while at Syracuse.
Yeah, like I think it's pretty obvious that both of those coordinators are really great. To your point, Christian, it doesn't seem like there is a clear heir apparent to either one of those guys on either side of the ball, at least not internally. Maybe there is externally. And we also know, like at the beginning of this season, there was a big Daily Orange special about one of the GMs of the AGMs, the young kid that Fran brought with him from Georgia, who's I think younger than both of us, who started at Georgia as a grad assistant. I forget his name.
Are we talking
but
about
it's
Aaron, I believe?
I think it's Aaron. I think Aaron. That sounds about right.
Yeah, I forget his last name. I'm going to pull it up right now.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not just the coaching staff, it's the GM, it's this entire infrastructure that you need to run a modern college football program that right now is exclusively all of Fran Brown's guys that he said he would bring in when he got his first job.
Yeah, so that's Aaron Mancini, director of scouting, and he's been with Fran since the Georgia days.
Exactly. So my assumption here is that next year will probably be the last year that it's Fran's gang altogether, because either things don't go well and he's going to have to make changes, or things are going to go well. And then you have 2 out of 3 years where things looked really good. Plus, when you had the quarterback, things were looking really good in this season. Like, that's enough to justify the hire of any of these guys pretty much anywhere. So I think that is going to be another interesting wrinkle just to keep in mind, because is it going to be a situation like you're saying, Christian, where Jeff Nixon is interviewing for head coaching jobs, and because this cycle is so crazy, a school goes to Jeff and goes, well, look, 17 different guys got shuffled around and now all of a sudden we need a head coach. We talked to you last year and we really liked you, but like things didn't work out then. Will it work out now? Like, I think that there's the reality that we probably see a lot of shuffling this offseason on the coaching side front, not because the team was so bad, but because the rest of the world is crazy. And Frank is making it very obviously known that he wants these guys to move on and get opportunities elsewhere.
And we need fans to remember as well, unless it's Fran leaving, these coaches going to certain programs is a good thing.
Right.
Because, and I always love it when Andy brings this story back up about talking about the reaction to Fran getting hired from his friends in Georgia.
Yeah, they were so excited that Fran was getting to start his own program, and they were so ecstatic of the mind that the Kirby coaching tree was growing, and they saw that as a positive thing. And I think that for Syracuse, like, we've had starts and stutters with this, and Marone obviously ended up never really being that route for us. Fran is trying to make it really clear that that's what he wants to do here. And I do think that what that means is that guys like Aaron, who are young and hungry, guys like Jeff Nixon, who are kind of in the limbo world of the NFL, not a named OC, but clearly doing so much work that an OC does, looks to Syracuse as an opportunity to really stretch their wings and get that name recognition, which is what we need, because we're never going to have the most money. We're never going to have the deepest and longest contracts for these guys. So it's going to come down to us having a reputation where we can attract these guys to come make a name for themselves, and then they go somewhere else.
remember, there's always at least one post every college football season which goes, "Hey, look at this Nick Saban coaching staff from 2012, and they're
Mhm.
all successful head coaches of some of the best Power Five programs in the nation." So, like that's so just because a coach leaves doesn't mean it's a bad thing because it grows the brand of Syracuse as a destination for coaches to be a good coach and to work with under a talented head coach himself.
Yeah, and so I think that it's going to be, again, it's tough to talk about things when the team is this bad, but like there are moving pieces here that I think are interesting that we should call out now, because once the changes happen, it's going to come fast, and it's going to be pretty aggressive.
Syracuse is not bowling. We know that. So December, much like when Fran was first hired, December is just going to be a levy of news.
Yes, recruiting, coaching staff, transfer portal stuff. Like I can, Fran. The most dangerous thing you can give Fran Brown is free time on his hands.
And he's about to have a good amount of it.
Yeah. So yeah, those are the two major sports. Obviously, there were some other sports that took place this week. Christian and I will probably spend some more time next week talking about it, just because we're not going to talk about a bad football game. And Monmouth will probably be very similar to the Drexel recap, and we're getting back into the swing of things with our some technical changes that we had in the back end. But things are moving in the fall. We're not, even after a 3-week hiatus, we're not dead. Can't kill us off that easy. But we're gonna be back doing this thing with the Disloyal Idiots pretty consistently. Christian, did I forget anything major in any of our two major sports this week?
Nothing in the two major sports. I'll just do a quick recap for the other ones. The big one is that unfortunately, Q's field hockey is unfortunately out of the NCAA tournament, losing to Princeton in the Elite Eight. So unfortunate for them. And men's soccer selection show is tomorrow, I believe, at 1 p.m. And men's soccer made it to the semifinals of the ACC tournament. So
Yes.
they look to be in a pretty good spot to at least make the tournament. I'm not sure about hosting wise or not, but definitely with their run into the ACC tournament, which included a win over, I believe, at the time number 5 NC State, should see them
Yes.
into the NCAA tournament.
Nice. And yes, they ended up losing, I believe, to SMU in the semis,
Yes.
correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I watched a little bit of that game. But so again, Coach Mac, just keep doing your thing, Mac. But yeah, that's it for this week's edition of the Disloyal Idiots. Christian and I will be back next week, 8-ish on our YouTube channel. Make sure that you like and subscribe us on YouTube, Disloyal Idiots, in order to watch us live every week. If you were listening to us on a podcast platform of choice, thank you so much. Make sure that you like and subscribe to this episode and to all of our episodes that help us trick the AI into expanding the Ottoman Empire. Thank you to our sister site, newsmagician.com. We really appreciate the work that obviously Christian does over there, and all the work that everybody does over there, and the continued support that we get from that site. You can follow us both on our various socials. We will repost this episode as many times as we can. And like we said, we are going to have some cool things coming up this off season, but for now, we're back in our weekly cadence. We're back live streaming. Go Orange.
Go Orange.